And good morning, everybody, and welcome to our council meeting of the 20th of December 2023. And before we start in earnest, I will ask our Deputy Mayor to open with karakia.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Mayor Otira, tēnā tātou katoa. Greetings, everyone. Tū tawa mai I runga, tū tawa mai I raro, tū tawa mai I roto, tū tawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora, ki te katoa. Haumi e, hui e, tāe ki e. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you. All right, welcome everybody, and again those online and those in the gallery. Our meeting has been recorded and has been live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. In terms of health and safety, on the unlikely event of an emergency, we will exit via the green signs and we will evacuate to the assembly area, which is the clock tower in Te Maraehine, the square. In terms of this non-smoking facility, again, unlikely event of needing a defibrillator, that is located in the foyer entrance on the ground floor of Customer Services. Any incidences, please report them to our committee administration team. Right, to officers, if you are speaking to something, please perhaps your name and title at the first time. That suffice for us, and we'll go from there. Right, we'll go to our apologies. And we have one apology from Councillor Billy Meehan and from Councillor Vaughan Dennison with late arrival. So I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll ask you to vote, please. And that is passed, 14 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, so we can continue today. We just need to look at our debating style. So this is around the change of debating style and our standing orders 2.12.1. Council adopt option C as the debating style for the rest of the meeting. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. If there's no questions or commentary to that, we will vote, please. That has passed, 14 votes for and none against. Okay, we will now move through to our paper around indicator frameworks for our long-term plan, and I welcome Kian and Julie to the table. Before we do that, we do actually need to move to... Oh, we did it. Okay, that's great. We've brought it back to the table. Now, I apologise that you've been probably about 3 or 4 meetings, and we've yet to really get to the end of this one. But welcome, and that was page 7 of our 13th of December papers. Councillors, if you want to look at that again, and I'll go back to you, Julie.
E nā mana, e nā reo, e nā karanga tanga maha. Kai te mehi, kai te mehi, kai te mehi. E mehi ana ki a rangitane e pupuri I te Māori o te whenua. Ki te marauhine takoto mai, e te kahikia, e ngā kai ko nihera, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Kian Aho, Policy Analyst, Research and Monitoring, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Tēnā koutou, Mayor and councillors. We thought we would do a brief presentation today just because we have had a few goes at this and it might be wise to just remind everybody of where we're up to. Click. Thank you, Hannah. I don't know, I was going to do that with my mind or something, I'm not sure. No, back one, thanks. So, as you know, over the last year, we've been working with you and with the community to develop the principles and the goals and the outcomes towards achieving those goals. We've developed a set of draft plans and the objectives that sit under each of those 14 plans that describe what the council will be doing over the next 10 years to achieve the outcomes described in the goals. Each of those plans is a series of actions, and then obviously we're at the pointy end now of talking about budgets to resource those actions. The question of targets, we have had a few discussions about this, beginning actually in one of the earlier workshops earlier in the year. Councillors have a series of strategic targets at the moment, one per goal. Earlier in our discussions with you, there was an indication of some enthusiasm for moving to a sort of more fluid series of targets where the connection between the goals was acknowledged and there was a greater understanding of the connections between the outcomes. So, for example, we know that the activities in one area don't just relate to the outcomes of one goal. So that's what we're here talking about today. So we've done the vision bit. We have the goals drafted, obviously for community feedback. The options today are don't set targets, set a range of targets, or set one target per goal as you have at the moment. The thing I wanted to emphasise through this presentation is that we have a series of indicators that we are continually looking at and revising, that we will continue to monitor and report on throughout and regardless of which option you select today, or if indeed you select any other option. So indicator monitoring is not what's on the table in this report. Many of the questions that we were asked at committee last time we discussed this were about those indicators, and that's entirely appropriate and we welcome those questions. But I did just want to emphasise that they're two slightly sort of separate things, and I've got an example that will hopefully enlighten later. So the pros and cons of the options, as we've explained in the report, option one is don't set targets. We already have the goals set out in extensive detail in the strategy and in the plans. We will be monitoring a series of indicators. Whether or not you set targets is not a deal breaker. All that material has already been agreed. Option two is to set a range of targets, whatever range you choose. In the report, in table 4 is probably the table to look at in the attachment. We've given you a starter for some things you might want to consider in terms of setting a range of targets. That would provide an opportunity to further explain the goals. It also would recognise the connections and interdependencies between the goals and the wellbeings. And it would also recognise the breadth of each goal, that they're not 4 narrow things, that they do in fact cover the 4 aspects of community wellbeing. And then option 3 is pretty much status quo, but obviously with a discussion of which targets those would be. It's simple. It doesn't recognise the connections and interdependencies that we've discussed. And also it requires you to decide which target you think represents the goal. And I guess, as I've talked about before, if it was as simple as sort of saying have a target of X economic wellbeing, then that would be very simple. But unfortunately, there's no such thing as a single measure of economic wellbeing, which is why we are having this conversation. So the decision-making process is obviously political. These are political goals and strategic direction, and so that it's appropriate then that the target selection would also be a political one. We've provided you with some advice to hopefully help with that decision-making, but it is entirely your decision. The advice that we've provided you with was developed considering SMART criteria, and I know everybody knows about SMART and it's a bit of a cliche, but in this instance it's actually really important to think about what these criteria mean We've suggested that targets would be specific, that they would be measurable rather than vague or amorphous, not vibes, unfortunately, we can't measure those very easily. Achievable, I gave the example of having a target of more sunshine hours in Palmerston North last time we spoke, and while we could report on how many sunshine hours there are, it's probably not very useful as a target. But they be realistic and relevant within our reach and make sense in our strategic context. We would expect targets to have some connection to the activities of council and for the things that elected members want to achieve for the city, and that they be timely, set in an appropriate timeframe. Any decisions made about these targets will be reflected in strategic documents and consultation documents for the LTP, and we would be really interested in having community feedback on those. So here's my example, which you may or may not be able to read. Economic wellbeing in an innovative and growing city. We report on a lot of indicators. They're the blue blobs. There are things that are very connected to economic wellbeing, and there are things which are perhaps more traditionally associated with other aspects of wellbeing, such as greenhouse gas emissions, but they also are relevant to economic wellbeing. So I think in the table, the one we've suggested would be a reasonable target to set for economic wellbeing could be GDP per capita. I guess what we're cautioning is if you set a target for one of the things that we don't have access to, if you think about our SMART criteria, then that's going to be probably somewhat problematic and perhaps confusing or difficult to achieve. And that's, no, you can go back. Yeah. We're happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Julie. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Julie and Karen. For goal 3, for goal 2 around creative and exciting, there was some discussion before about having a different, if we were to go for a single goal, about having a different goal that reflects that one better. Yes. But I see we've still got the same one in the paper. Did you have an update on that?
So we have, in your agenda is the memo that we provided further to that conversation.
With different possible options.
So the paper that's on the agenda is the original paper. It's just been carried forward. It's not a revised paper. But if we look at, do you want to go to that slide? Yeah, that's right. So here are some of the things that we've provided you with. These are from the resident survey. So these are things that council does have access to information about. Palmerston North has a creative arts scene, so how people respond to that statement. These are all perception answers. Palmerston North has lots of opportunities to be physically active. Palmerston North is a city with great parks, sports fields, with a misspelt sports fields, and recreation facilities, and Palmerston North is a great city for student life. And then there's one more, the engagement in the arts, which we did provide through the memo. So we provided you with that information to give you a bit of some further information if you wanted to perhaps form targets around those.
Okay, so if we went for the one target per goal option, would we also need to indicate that we wanted to change what that target was, or would it just be assumed that it would be the ones that you've got in the original paper?
Right, so I believe the way we framed the options, there are no targets until you agree some. So until you move targets, then we don't have any. I guess the current targets would sort of lapse with the renewal of the 10-year plan. So you were able to move any series of the information or anything else.
Okay,
today.
but say we wanted to move the option 3, would we also need to move we wanted the target to be different for goal 2, or would it? Yes. Sorry, I'm maybe not being very clear. Yes, we would.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
And the other thing I just wanted to check is the numbers in the targets. Are they just based on a small amount of stretch on where we are already?
Yes. I'll give you the examples of the numbers that we have for the question Palmerston North has a creative art scene. So I would propose 75% being the 5-year average was 66 or 67%, and currently it is 61%. So if you want to stretch it, we would want to stretch it to 75%, and I think it's achievable because our highest, as you can see over here, the highest is 74. So we have hit 74, 75 before, just that recently we're at 61. So it makes sense to go as, 75%. That's
Okay.
how the numbers I would, yeah.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
If I might just add, there is sense to all the numbers, and I guess perhaps rather than the term stretch target, we would probably be more inclined to say that we think that they reflect the aspirations that councillors have already expressed through the goals and outcomes. They're not fanciful aspirations, perhaps, but nor are they, gosh, we're going to hit this regardless targets. Yeah.
Councillor Harpiter.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, team. Just looking at page 13 and looking at the table 4. So have we got a comparison of how that compares to other councils and the targets that other councils use?
We haven't done an extensive analysis of what other councils do. I do know that because this council revises its strategic direction alongside the 10-year plan process, we're going through a slightly different process than some other councils do. I know that in the past some councils have developed many targets, bearing in mind that we're not talking about performance targets of the organisation here. We're not talking about quarterly reporting and those sorts of things. We're talking about city targets. I know Auckland at one point had a target, I believe, for something like life expectancy of the city as one of many targets. So we don't really have a clear answer of how other councils do this, but I know that many councils wouldn't have targets in this way at all. Yeah, did you?
And from the table 4, some of these targets are aligned to national and regional targets. So therefore, we are really trying to put into a local context what the national, at a country level, would like to achieve. For example, the percentage of travel to work and education is based on our Horizons Regional Land Transport Plan target, and greenhouse gas emission would be based on the national emission reduction, as well as the last one, item 7, which is the reduction in waste disposal per capita. That's also aligned with the Aotearoa waste strategy. So there are some that are aligned nationally.
So
regionally.
could these targets be benchmarked? That was really where I was driving the question against other councils.
Some can and some can't, depending on the data source. So where there's nationally available and TA level available data, then yes, but where it's our own data source, then that would be less possible.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Zabellan.
Ngā mihi kia korua. If we were to propose an alternative targets, how would you suggest that we go about determining an appropriate quantum or percentage for that?
Pam's looking at me to answer that. Do you want to do it? Okay.
I think if we go back to the criteria, so it has to be specific, and I would more want to look at the priority would be achievable, and achievable would be a long-term average plus something, and also to compare what we were in the latest performance to see whether how far we needed to go. And I think I would also be counter-checking with some of the other officers who are working in that space, because there's really no point setting a target where we do not have resources to achieve it, and becomes problematic if we don't have the resource to achieve it, and then we set it a target and and it's just challenging.
Indeed. Perhaps if we were proposing a target, we might also give direction to officers to do some analysis about what might be an appropriate quantum or figure to put in that target. Right. Thank you very much.
Councillor Barn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question really about the survey questions that we've got in front of this. When we've established whatever our target approach might be, will there be an opportunity to review the survey questions to support that? Or
Ideally, we would like to have a time series that we already are tracking. So ideally, my first choice that I would take as an indicator is to choose an indicator where we already have information. If we have decided on a target based on a new indicator, we will need to then look for where we are going to find the information from. And if it means that we have to add that new question into a survey, then we will have to do that. And then the difficulty with that approach is that we will not have any baseline, and setting a target without any sense of where we are now could be quite challenging and dangerous also.
and do you have a preference about whether that's our own customer service survey data, or if we use the external surveys and the report references the Active New Zealand and the Creative New Zealand reporting? Do we have a sense of, is that a yes and, or we prefer to use our own?
In fact, all of these are not our own. It's all external. For example, our local resident surveys is done by Key Research. So it is based on a sampling of about 500 to 600 annually. So that is where we would prefer to use ideally.
Just to add, I think we tend not to have a duplication. So, for example, the Creative New Zealand engagement in the arts, that's something that we purchase a Palmerston North sample for so that we can provide that information. That's that next graph, engagement and participation in the arts. So that's not something that we have from our resident survey. So it's a bit of a mixture in terms of sources to make sure we have the widest breadth, I suppose, available of potential sources of information.
Okay, right, thank you. I'll leave that there.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just some questions on the 35% reduction of citywide greenhouse gas emissions target. Reading on page 235 that our current citywide emissions are 11.3% higher than the 2016 baseline. In effect, is this a target for a 46% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from today?
This one, I may need to call upon my colleague to further explain that.
Just jump in. It's this one here.
Greenhouse gas emission.
This is the one that you're Mr. Watson.
And if I may start, based on my conversations with David Watson, while currently we have increased our emissions based on what the baseline was, we are still on track and it would be achievable. That's the impression I had.
Hello, Adam Jarvis, Principal Climate Change Advisor. Essentially, you're correct. So this target that's proposed there is just a straight line extrapolation from previous targets. So it's just building on what's been decided previously. We've pushed that out another 3 years, essentially.
Fair enough. So my question there then is, should this be a per capita target, given that a straight line reduction runs counter to our growth assumptions? That, I mean, given this is a baseline of 7 years ago, I don't know exactly what the city growth's been, but it might have been 4 or 5% in terms of population. So wouldn't a better measure be, are we going backwards or forwards in terms of achieving this target on a per capita basis?
That'd be over to you, Councillor, and to the council more generally.
All right.
Measures different things, in effect, right? But both would have merit depending on what exactly it is that you're looking to target.
Okay, so my last question there then, given these, I believe this is based on a national target or something along those lines, as was said earlier, would a per capita target not be appropriate in the national environment we find ourselves in? I don't want to propose it if it's not appropriate, is what
If I may answer.
asking.
Yeah, it's possible to do a per capita, to run it along where we are in terms of emission, and it gives us a per capita view on it. But my understanding of how the national targets have been set, it is not a per capita target, because if it was a per capita target, we would have then followed the national.
All right, thank you.
But it's possible to have a per capita.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to you both. A couple questions, one around Goal 4. Just interested if there's been any consideration there around having a more people and participation kind of oriented goal rather than kind of a hard goal around emissions. So for example, how many people are actively doing something about sustainability in their life or business, the kind of data that you could collect through a survey?
I think if I might start, I think those things are definitely discussed in the articulation of the goal description and in the objectives. There's certainly words in there that councillors have expressed in terms of people's actions and sustainability. I mean, Goal 4 also talks about waste and biodiversity and, a number of other things, which is why a sort of blunt instrument target can be somewhat problematic. I mean, I guess, and I'll ask Kian to comment on this, I'm not sure that we necessarily have that information available to, it would be up to councillors perhaps to give us a steer as to the sorts of things you might be looking to do. I know in the past we have done things like, excuse me, report on number of Green Corridors volunteers, for instance, or the sorts of things that we have the ability to report on, as opposed to perhaps going out and looking and doing some primary research, which we may not have the resources to do. Did you want to?
Yeah, I would prefer to have something that we're already monitoring, and the climate change team is actively monitoring on an annual basis the greenhouse gas emission. So my motto is less is more. If we already have an indicator that is fit for purpose, we can always add on to it, but if that is sufficient, then let's use what we are using nationally to monitor it.
Thanks for those answers. So just so I can understand, if we did want to go towards a more people and participation oriented type indicator,
then we would need to go and look for indicators that we might already have or improvise to collect more information, which will mean more resources to collect the information, and that would contribute towards part of the storytelling of how we are doing it, how we are achieving it. I mean, that's the value of collecting more information, to be able to tell that story.
Great, thank you.
If I might just add, if we go back to the slide with the arrow, could you just flip back? There's nothing to stop us providing, more information on different indicators as we go. I mean, I used the word goal, and I guess, so that depends whether you're talking about an indicator or a specific target. So as information comes to light or other data gets gathered, then absolutely we'll add to our bank of resources. We would always want to be providing information about behaviour change and how people are responding and reacting. We're just pretty much going with what is realistic and achievable from an organisational perspective at the moment.
Great, thank you. My other question was around Goal 1. It seems that we're proposing to, if we go with a target there, that it's a size target, GDP, rather than kind of a quality target in terms of what the economy is actually doing for us in terms of housing people or providing jobs or those kind of things. Any general advice around that kind of size versus quality target setting?
We can come back to you on this one. I can just like to explain to you why we have chosen GDP per capita, because we will be able to track how the economy is doing generally. So if it's tracking up, we want to know divided on how is the population benefiting from it as well. So that is already, that's why you use a GDP per capita rather than GDP, as to how they want to choose how to spend on their income and earnings. It's entirely up to them, and it would definitely affect housing. It would affect the quality of life that we would also be included in our monitoring, but that does not necessarily need to be a target for the goal.
I might just ask Stacey to add to the economic well-being, you know, what's the best sort of one go? I mean, we have talked in the past about the previous target was jobs, and every time the number of jobs gets mentioned in the chamber, somebody will say, what kind of jobs? Are they well-paid jobs? Are they part-time jobs? Are they not? So none of those indicators is a perfect representation of economic well-being.
Kia ora, Stacey Bell, City Economist. We do undertake a broad range of economic reporting in depth for the city every quarter. So that's where we capture the real detail around the quality of the economic growth for the city, or the economic development. I think these indicators are a snapshot of an indication of how the city is tracking toward economic well-being, which I do believe that GDP per capita is an important one of those. In terms of our environmental impacts on GDP, we are developing a series there that will also be provided to the council every year in the structure report, and that's around the emissions per GDP, $1 million of GDP, which is an international benchmark. So this won't cover the whole range of the economic reporting we do. It is just a snapshot just to indicate economic well-being per se.
Great. Thank you all. Mr. Mayor.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Kian. Thanks, Julie. And you finally got it on our plate. Well done. So ultimately, councillors, you know, these targets or indicators need to actually drive the vision and the goals. So there's got to be a real linkage there. And I believe we need targets rather than just going to say option one. Which was indicators, but there is a link between the two, I believe. In speaking to officers late yesterday, because I saw this paper coming up and we've got to find a position, a starting point on it, I suggested to them what would a combination of some of the indicators and some suggested targets that are there be put back to them and formed more fully formed back to us in council in February. But we have to give them an idea what they would look like, and it was seen as possibly a good way to go. So then we would agree on those specific numbers when we've got some more detail on them. And I say, preferring option 3 rather than option two rather than option 3 is because, and it was borne out by some of your questions. I mean, an example, some of our goals are so broad, trying to get one target is going to be difficult. And I take goal 2 around cultural. It absolutely represents more than just physical activity. There's arts, there's culture, there's language, and a lot of other things in it. So can we encompass all of those, but still have some absolute measurables on that? And I believe we can. They can be specific. They can be measurable. A few of you spoke about the stretch. So yes, they've got to be aspirational, but also achievable. But they can be stretch. And I think we saw a few graphs there around where we've come and where we've gone and where we are at the moment. But they've also got to be relevant too, you know, for instance, around exciting. You know, we're not a Barcelona, although the Spanish might think we are, but we're not even in Auckland. But are we exciting? I think we are in a regional city sense. So it's finding something that's relevant to us and be comfortable in our own skin around that. So I would like to put up a motion to get us started, to certainly get us talking about it. And it's around that council endorse option 2, a range of targets as described in attachment 1 to inform the preparation of the LTP. And to give you an example of what that could be, for instance, under economic goal 1, innovative and growing, and I've got this seconded by the Deputy Mayor, is it could be, rather than us picking it now as a measurement on jobs, and we've always had this debate, what is that measurement? Is it FTEs? Is it all jobs? Is it value of jobs? Let's let the staff come back with something that we can decide on. Annual earnings, GDP per capita, housing affordability, training, education numbers, and numbers for higher qualifications. So that could be something where we ask the staff to come back with a little bit more detail on the specifics of that. That way we've covered what I believe the broad range of economic measurements there and targets. Under cultural goal 2, it could be around percentage of activity within our population sectors, it could be around arts participation, it could be around multilingual, te reo Māori and other languages. We're very multicultural, so we've got to pull that into it somehow. And then events numbers and tourism numbers, we never talk about that, and yet yesterday or the day before we were put up in the New Zealand Herald as one of the 3 tourism centres that's actually bucked the trend. So that's an example of how that could work. Goal 3 around social, it's obviously around the connected and safe, the percentage of people that feel Palmerston North is welcoming and safe, the well-connected local council with residents. That's a real interesting one. We sometimes get judged by our last decision, and all sometimes depends where things happen in the chamber or out on the street. But are we well connected with our residents? Not sure how that will be measured, but that's the staff to sort that out. Supporting the community and volunteer groups, do we do that? We do that very well, I believe. Focus on youth and education, training and employment opportunities. That's how we're dealing with our youth. We should have a focus on youth somewhere. And then access to green spaces. Environmental, good active in PT does. But we also should help our wider city community. So I think there should be a focus on us first. Biodiversity improvement, more birds, trees, green spaces, improving the water quality of the Awa, and obviously waste diversion. So that's just some examples. And that was to get us started, basically. If this fails, obviously we'll go in another direction. But it was just to get us started around option 2 and having more than just one target, but certainly focused targets on those particular goals. So I'll open it up for comments. Councillor Johnson.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say something, but I'm just trying to take all this in. Can I just put a question to you first? Have you checked with staff that we've got the ability to measure all of these things that you've put up?
The vast majority, yes, because the numbers exist in other parts of the organisation. For instance, the waste, the improving of water quality can be, the GDP, all the economic numbers, yes. Otherwise, I want to put this forward.
Okay. Right, well, I'll just trying to gather my thoughts, but I'll make my comment now anyway. Well, until the Mayor came forward with 4 or 5 targets per goal, I was going to say that I was happy to support either option 2 or option 3, because I think there's benefits in both of them. Probably what I don't support, though, is having like 5 targets per goal. So I'm not going to support this, I'm afraid. I would have been happy to support the 7 targets proposed in option 2, or even a single target proposed in option 3. But the number of targets that are being put up here is going to be confusing. And the more targets you put in front of people, the less clear it is what you're really looking at. Many of these things will be measured anyway. I see they're in the indicator list. I personally think I will probably, rather than this, prefer option 3, which is one target per goal. So I'll indicate that at the moment I'm not going to be supporting this, although I would have supported the original option 2. And should this fail, I'll propose option 3 with an amended goal 2. Thank you.
Councillor Isabellin.
Ngā mihi, Mr Mayor. I want to thank you for putting this up because I think that I've thought about this quite a lot, and I have thought hard about how we could settle on targets that address the scope and breadth of the goal area and our role within that. And I think what you've outlined here shows quite clearly that the scope of these goals are quite large and cover many items. So I will indicate now I have put up an alternative, if this fails, that moves option 3 with revised targets. I have suggested a revised target 2, but just specifically on this, I think it is important that we have targets that sit squarely, not just within the scope of the goal, but what our role is within that, because that's what we can be measuring, and that's our performance, and that's sort of what we're bringing to the table within say, economic, having a growing and innovative city, for example. I'll just outline where I'm thinking in terms of creative and exciting, because I think that's a really good example that the Mayor pointed out. There are so many aspects to what's creative and exciting, and the target that we're settling on now really only looks at the volume of how active people are. So I feel that we do miss a large amount of what makes our city creative and exciting with that, but we also miss what our job is, which isn't to go around making sure that people are going for runs every day. It's making sure that they have places to go for a run, that they have places to go and do the things that they want to do in the city. So I have proposed one that looks at how satisfied people are with our facilities, with our opportunities for active and passive recreation, including the spaces and facilities for sports and play, but for arts, culture and heritage as well, because we do capture all of that data already, that is already being collated and presented to us. So this is really looking to aggregate that beyond just physical activity and apply that across the whole scope of the goal. And there's quite a lot of variation between that. So I'm not sure if I should talk to that too much now or later if this fails, but I noted with interest the officer's answer to how to settle on a target, because I'd sort of felt that I might just be picking numbers out of the air if I was proposing one. So I have actually gone through our last 2 resident surveys and looked at what the feedback and percentages that we got in terms of satisfaction for these things, and they do vary quite a lot from sports facilities, which are quite high, and cultural facilities, which are sort of mid-range. So I would be very happy to propose something like a 75%, and then maybe take some advice from the officers once they've looked into that data as to whether that's an acceptable target across that broad scope. I have also thought quite a lot about the other 4 goals and 4 targets, and I have not been able to settle on anything that I feel does cover all of that in the same way that this does. So I'm only moving an amendment to for the target for goal 2. But I do feel that 1 target per goal is a simple and elegant way to communicate how we're tracking against those goals for the community, who aren't going to do deep dives necessarily into that, or maybe not all of them anyway. So I'm in favour of 1 target per goal if those targets are broad enough that they do address the scope of that goal and what our role is with it. So thank you very much.
Councillor Harpiter.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr Mayor. I was a little bit like Councillor Johnson, a bit confused about what you had put up, Mr Mayor, but because I did quite like the table that was on page 13, table 4, but in reviewing what you had put up, you've actually asked the officers to come back and say in February next year and see how these can be measured. So, and this is probably a little bit broader to our current goals. So this is probably better than what is in the targets, because this is probably giving us better goals that we can actually get measurements from. So they're broader. So I probably will go with what's current, what you put up, and see how that goes. But if it fails, I'll go with what Councillor Johnson and vote with what Councillor Johnson's putting up. But I will vote for this in the first instance. Thank you.
Councillor Barn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think, similar to others, I've a little bit floored by this one, because this has been in our order papers since the beginning of December, and there's been quite some opportunity for discussion around that, and I'm grateful to Councillor Zabellin for her thoughts on this, which I agree with, and have seconded her alternate recommendation for goal 2. I think for me, in the reflection on this, it was a really useful discussion. I really enjoyed the activities that we did out in the lobby area where we went through that, had the opportunity to look through that target list, and my reflection from that activity was there are things on there that we don't control and we barely influence. So they're measures, but they're measures of stuff that is not much to do with us. We're on the receiving end of it, but we have limited influence and control. And so my preference for our targets is that we tie those closely to the things that we have influence and control over. And so when I see examples, and just in that quick flick through, some of those I think are great, but others, for example, training and education numbers and the number of higher education qualifications, I go, well, that's interesting. It probably does tell us something, but we have limited influence in that space. I'd suggest actually no influence in that space. So for me, my preference was the original option 2. I didn't mind option 3. It went a little bit further, but my preference was for a clear set of targets that spoke particularly to things where we had influence and control, and we could communicate that to our community about the actions that we were taking to deliver on the targets that we'd set. And when we step away from that, that just gets a bit woolly to my thinking and harder to communicate. So I won't support what's here, and I'll support the original option 2 for preference, or 3 if that's what comes, with the change to the goal 2 recommendation, which does try to address the concerns that you'd raised about how narrow that scope was in that particular goal, and to include all of our facilities and spaces across the range of cultural and sporting opportunities. So, sorry, that's a bit unclear, but no to this, yes to that, and something else. Thanks.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. This certainly does feel a bit on the fly and perhaps creative. I'm a little bit, I guess by way of analogy, I kind of feel like it's almost like the long-term plan process in and of itself. And what we've got is perhaps a Mark 1 proposal here. I think the papers kind of had us on Mark 2 or Mark 3 perhaps. And so I'm very much of two minds in terms of how to proceed here, to be very honest. My sense is that given that it's December and we don't need to land things until February, March, that we could potentially take a broader view at this stage and still perhaps get back to something that looks a bit more like option 2, which I thought was a quite reasonable starting point. I'm not so much a fan of the just 4 targets. I think this list is probably a bit long for my preference. And that's what I'm really grappling with at this point. I do think to some of the concerns that have been raised around numbers of targets, I think a little bit of that's around what we communicate about targets versus kind of what we actually measure around targets, and I don't think we should be striving to communicate at a very heavy level, a large number of targets, but I think having a broader set of targets and being able to communicate what is appropriate to appropriate audiences does make some sense. So I'm a little bit leaning towards the wider open. I've waffled on now for 2 or 3 minutes and haven't told you how I'm going to vote because I actually don't know how I'm going to vote. This is very much in the flow.
All right, thank you. Look, I'm not going to die in the ditch over it, councillors. And just to, and I'm reading the room pretty clearly, so I got things started. That's what I've done. It hasn't been socialised. I'm really sorry. I've had about 2 hours of my life to myself to get it to you. So it's literally been about 4 working days to get this to you. So I apologise if you haven't had a lot of socialisation of it. I was trying to get things started. That's good that we have got things to people are starting to form some views, which was what it was all about. But we do need to own this. I think this needs to be ours rather than something that's just shoved in front of us. Pick this number, you must do this because this is what the data says. Actually, this is ours, and we've got to be a little bit aspirational about what we want to do. I have to stand up and preach this stuff, and I have to believe in it. And if it's not our work, I'm not going to do it. So I'm just being really honest there. And some of the stuff that was in front of us, I just don't believe was our language, was us. So that's why I've put some stuff there that was a combination of the indicator and some of the goals that were previously we'd had, which we knew were slightly outdated, and trying to match some of our goals, how they currently sit. So I'll make no apologies to putting it in front of you. What it has done is probably solidified your thinking as well. The goals are broad, and although I have seen what's in front, if this fails, what's in front from Councillor Zabellan, and that goes some way to addressing the culture goal, goal 2, because if we have the current option 3, that doesn't address, I don't see culture in that, I don't see arts represented in that. So, yeah, again, that's a lot of my reasoning and my rationale for what I've done. Look, we capture a lot of data in dashboards, but as the Mayor, and I know a lot of councillors, we very rarely have seen those, or they haven't been, I suppose, communicated well to us, and I'd say residents probably don't see them as well. I know they exist and they're very good. So I suppose my challenge to the officers is getting those more visible, because you do a lot of work in the background, but I'm just not sure if there's a huge amount of oversight outside a very small set of council people knowing what they are. So we can do a lot more with those. So look, I'm just put something up to get the conversation started. Again, I'm not going to die in the ditch. I'm reading the room, and I certainly would support, if this fails, and it's unusual that I'd probably say this, but if this fails, I would support option 3 and Councillor Zabellan's amendment to that. All right, if we could vote, please. Okay, so it's around endorsing option 2 in the range of targets. You're not connected. It's on its way. We've couried it to you. It should be there with you now. Can you please vote? That's failed. Lack of majority, 7-all. Okay. Councillor Zabellan, back to you with your amendment. Okay. Sorry, did you have you've got a seconder? Okay, Councillor Zabellan. Okay, fine. Over to you, Councillor.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So, for the reasons I said before, I'm tending towards keeping it simple for the public and having one headline goal per target. One headline target per goal. That doesn't mean that we're not going to be measuring all those other important things that the Mayor put up in the last recommendation. Many of those are going to be measured in the indicator framework. But I just think in terms of keeping it relatively simple, going out to the public, that we should stick with the one target per headline goal. However, for goal 2, I agree with the Mayor and Councillors Bellin and others that it doesn't adequately reflect the arts and the creativity in the city. And so I understand that Councillor Bellin has an amendment to that, which is around, I think as she described, measuring satisfaction of people with passive and active recreation, including arts, culture and heritage. So if that could be substituted for goal 2, then I'm happy to move option 3 with an amended goal 2 as described by Councillor Isabella. And I think we're not losing anything by doing this. Everything that we still want to keep a track of is still being measured. But what we are doing is clearly linking a specific target to a specific goal. And I think that that encompasses much more focus, I suppose, on where it is that we're going with each of these goals. I'm happy to hear that GDP per capita is a suitable measurement. I did have some thoughts about jobs and housing and so on. In terms of goal 3, I think that that is a good reflection about us being a welcoming and friendly city. And I'm happy that the greenhouse gas emissions reflects goal 4. So I think that that's a sensible set of targets to pick. It could still be changed at a later date if councillors wish, or if public submit and say that they want something different. But at least it's a working version that we can go forward with. So I'd ask for your support, councillors. Thank you.
Councillor Isabella, I'll get you to speak to your amendment first.
You've pressed me. It's not me, it's her.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I won't speak too much more about this, just to say that this amended target is really about the great things to do in the city and the great places to do them and what our role is, which is providing those services, activities, events, grants, facilities to host them. I believe this target captures that in a measurable and meaningful way within the scope of the data that we already collect, and I also believe that it adheres to the SMART principles of being specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, relevant and timely, and it's also a satisfaction measure which we also use for goal 3 as a welcoming community. So I think it's consistent with what we've got, but it does broaden the scope of what we've had in the past. That's all I'll say. I'll just ask for your support. Thank you.
Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to this amendment? Okay, yeah. All right. Look, I'll just quickly comment. I think this goes a long way to capturing all of those attributes of goal 2 around culture, arts, sport and recreation. And yeah, I'll support. I'm just reading it as I'm speaking. I will support it. It captures the essence of what we're trying to do in providing facilities and quality facilities for people to be active or participate in either arts, culture, heritage or sport and rec. Okay. All right. We will vote on... Oh, you do want to speak now? Okay. Sorry, I thought you said you didn't. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I did want to speak on this one, because I think that goal 2 about being a creative, exciting city, I think that for me, at the heart of that, that's about having things to do. And that's why culture and sport lines up under that, but it's not all about the active recreation opportunities, of which we have many, and that's why we're describing that this as passive recreation, which is kind of things that people go to and experience, but doesn't require specialist footwear. So active and passive recreation, including those spaces and facilities. I take your point you made earlier about events. I think that could easily come into this kind of measure of things to do. But for a starter for 10, I think this moves us on from just the focus on active recreation. So I'll be grateful for your support. Thank you.
Do you need a right of reply? Right, cool. We will vote just on Amendment Goal 2, please. It is 14 votes for, none against. All right, we have one further amendment. I'll get that up. Okay, all right, well, I'll go to you, Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just while it's being typed up, all my amendment is to change Goal 4 to add per capita at the very end, which you might have taken from my questions. And I'll give you the reasons for that, because I'm not just trying to water down Goal 4, I'm trying to link into that achievable and realistic section of the SMART goals. And so I've done some mathematics here, and the problem with the goal as it stands is we're not operating in a static environment. We have some really serious goals for growth in this city, for increasing our population. And the problem that comes with an increasing population is every individual generates on average 7.8 tonnes of carbon. So by increasing the population but continuing with a static goal, we're not actually asking the average person in our city to make a 33%. We're asking the average person in our city to make a 52% reduction based on our population growth statistics. And I can give you the maths here. So what effectively we're trying to do is reduce from a 673,000 tonne basis per capita to a 451,000 tonne basis per capita. I don't have the commercial data here, so whatever the commercial data is skews it a little bit more, a little bit less. But on a per household basis, that's what we're talking about. But the problem is, by the time we get to 2033, our population isn't going to be 86,400. Our population is going to be 98,300, roughly, depending on which set of statistics you use, but somewhere in that vicinity. So that means that we're not working off a base of 673,000 tonnes in total. We're working off a base of 767 tonnes per total, not taking into account the fact that we're actually already 11.3% over the baseline, which puts it up to, goodness, I didn't write that figure down, but somewhere in the 800 mark. So if we don't do this, what we are asking is our community to make individually an over half reduction, which when we're talking about the situation we find ourselves in, that we're 7 years later, we're actually 11% worse rather than 11% better, I'm just not convinced that it's achievable or realistic to our community to make a 52.9% reduction to their per capita carbon emissions. If we address this per capita, not only does it give us better data because we can see how we're actually performing as a city, but it also gives us a more reasonable goal to achieve, because I don't believe in setting goals that aren't realistic or achievable. So I don't think straight line works. I think it runs counter to our economic growth and our growth objectives as a city. And so by indexing this to a per capita basis, it's still an ambitious goal. It is still in line with our city's vision of being an environmentally friendly city and reducing our individual emissions per capita. But I think if we're trying to grow our population, having a static goal isn't going to work. If we want to remove our growth goals and say we're going to be a city that sits at the population we've got, then absolutely have a static goal. But this is a more realistic way in which we reflect just the environment we find ourselves in, and it's how we make sure that our goals align rather than run counter to each other. So I hope you support me in this.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mayor. This is just a good chance to comment, actually, because I had a few thoughts around Goal 4 anyhow. I'll preface my comment by saying, what matters to the planet is actually the total emissions. And we have to keep on remembering that. We can also acknowledge that as a people, we aren't in charge of the whole planet. We aren't even actually in charge of the community. We're here to serve the community. And when we think about what's relevant for the community and what matters to the community and how we interpret that for the community and share that with the community and hopefully motivate the community towards working with us towards a goal that actually starts to see it bend in the right direction, I'm actually quite comfortable with what's been put up here as a means of communicating it. Our Goal 1 indicator is a per capita basis, so I think it gives us a common basis with that. as well. And really, you know, anything that starts moving the dial in the right direction here is going to be a good thing for not only the city, but the planet. I will say that it is critical to me that this does remain a citywide goals, and I will accept what the mayor said earlier, and thankfully we do have a bit more direct control within the organization in terms of our emissions, but ultimately it's about finding ways to work with the community and to get the community much more engaged in this space. It's in everyone's best interest to make sure that we are progressing as a whole community towards drawing down emissions over time. So thank you to Councillor Wood for bringing us a clarifying amendment. Happy to support that and the goal as proposed.
Councillor Hancock.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I was just really just after a little bit of confirmation, please, just in terms of an officer comment, just to ensure that we've got the ability to retrospectively realign this to our 2016 baseline. My interest here, of course, is I really want to be comfortable that we can actually track year on year against this kind of this new lens.
Yes, we can do that.
Thank you. All right. We've already got a. He already commented. Unless you got something else to add.
Do have the ability to measure it per capita. I have run the figures both for GDP and per capita. The one caution, and Adam might have some thoughts about this too, is the assertion that population is the biggest driver of emissions. It's certainly a main driver, but actually with our citywide emissions data, one of the biggest drivers is actually rain in the South Island. So there is things like that to consider that do actually impact on the numbers. So all I'm saying is I would like to get some clarity on how robust that information would be in terms of providing context for us around our per capita emissions. That's the only concern that I do have about it, because it is quite volatile due to the impacts of energy that we're using in the country, in Palmerston North. And that's based on national figures that are heavily influenced by things like rain in the South Island and our ability to generate hydroelectricity, as one example.
Oh, okay. I was wondering where you were going with this. So if you'd said generation,
yes,
energy generation, then I think we would have all got it.
Yeah, so it does heavily influence it, and that would be my one caution, that we would need context around it to describe or narrate what those impacts have been relative to the impacts of population.
So wind doesn't come into it?
Yes, wind does, but hydro is more influential.
Okay.
But just a point of caution there.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'll comment. Look, I'm quite happy to support this. I mean, we've got the officers' views, and I thank you for that. I think the goals should talk to each other too, somewhat, rather than just standing in isolation. But with this goal, we made some really good progress on this initially in the last 6 years, mainly around our, and again, we get confused sometimes around our city council emissions and then our citywide emissions. The only thing I'd say, it's very hard to influence everybody else, and that's my only bit of caution around this. We could possibly get ourselves into a carbon zero, carbon neutral position as a city council, possibly, I don't know. But how we're going to do that as a city, I really am going to personally struggle with a little bit. But we've got to try, so I'm up for the challenge. But I do think that the per capita maybe gives us that a little bit more context, because it can be somewhat confusing in the bigger scheme. Back to you, Councillor Wood, for right of reply. Just
thought I'd comment briefly in light of the comment the officer made. And absolutely, Stacey's right. And that's sort of one of the driving reasons for this is actually it's not all down to us as a city council. It isn't even all down to the individual. The power you use depends where it's generated from. So with the goal as it currently stands, in a straight line reduction, you'll be talking reducing from 7.8 tonnes per person to 4.6. Under a per capita basis, which this amendment proposes, is a reduction of 7.8 tonnes per person to 5.2. So it's still an ambitious goal. It's still potentially an unachievable goal, but it is certainly more in line with what we could expect reasonably from our population to do, take into account factors absolutely that are outside of our control, particularly around power generation, around international shipping and transport and other leading causes of emissions for an individual household. So I think this is just a way to be fairer to all of our households in our community.
Okay, thank you. We will vote on the amendment, please. Passed, 14 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right, we'll go back to the substantive. And before I speak to it, if I could just ask the mover and the seconder a question. Goal 3, we've got 67% of people feel that Palmerston North is a welcoming and friendly city. Would you be up to round that up to 70%? It just seems a strange ad hoc number to have, and I realise that it's got some data in behind it, but with the questioning, they did say things moved up and down over time.
Yes, I certainly would be. I mean, I take your point from earlier that actually there is a level of aspiration in this. Yes, we want things to be achievable, but we also want to be, quite aspirational with it. So I'm happy. I don't know about the seconder. Yeah, she's indicated. Cheers.
Right. All right. Well, I'll speak to the substantive then. Look, I'm more than happy to support these. There is an element of continuation from where we've been before. We've teased out, we've got goal 2 sorted, so thank you. That was really my biggest bugbear, was such a wide-ranging goal that didn't fairly reflect subsectors within it. So I'm more comfortable with what is there now. Remembering that this is a draft that goes forward into informing the LTP. Our community might come back and say, no, we want you to work on something else. It's probably unlikely, but that they will have some comments, I'm sure. The GDP, as I said earlier, all the goals do need to speak to each other as well. So if we're trying to encourage some growth, we've got to be mindful of what we're doing socially within the city, as well as environmentally, and making sure that people feel happy in the place that they live in. So I think we're in a pretty good space. So with those slightly tweaked numbers, it gives it that little bit more aspiration, a little bit more stretch without being silly, that is non-achievable. So I'm happy to support it. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and a bit in line with your question to the mover, I've got one as well, particularly around goal 2 and 3, whether there be a comfort with the wording of at least. I think that kind of wording actually clarifies that it is a minimum, and we'd be happy if even more people were happier. I'm a little bit worried if we're wanting to cap happiness at 70%. So if you're happy with that, it'd be great to see those, particularly in goals 2 and 3.
Councillor Johnson.
Well, I mean, could you not also apply that to goal 4 and goal 1 as well? I mean, I to my mind, it's kind of understood that it's at least, but I don't know. If you're going to put at least in 2 and 3, then at least has to be in 1 and 4 as well.
So what do you want to do, mover and seconder? It's up to you.
You want to add at least?
I don't see the harm in adding at least.
Sorry,
Okay,
that's the microphone thing. Yes, okay, but to all 4. I'm not just 2 of them.
Okay, so we're going to add Okay, all right. We will go now back to you, Councillor Johnson, for right of reply.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, colleagues, for your work in refining this down to something that we can all feel comfortable with. And I think it's just important to understand that at this stage, you know, nothing's set in stone, that things can be moved around a little bit if we're feeling differently about it after the Christmas break, or depending on submissions we get from public. But this, I think, is a working model to go ahead with, so I'd ask for your support. Thank you.
All right. We will vote on the substantive, please. And that has passed 14 votes for and none against. Thank you. Good to get unanimous there. Just one final and very small but quite important recommendation for myself and the Deputy Mayor is the actual name of this. I believe it needs to be representative of all sectors. So calling and being more civic in its approach, so calling it the city strategy rather than a community or wellbeing strategy, that it just incorporates all parts of our community and wider city. I struggled initially when I saw it came up, and I wondered where the other wellbeing strategies were, but I got told by the officers this is it, and it's all encompassing the city. So to make it clear to our public, I think it does need the word city in there. So I'd hope that it's pretty simple, but I think it's still quite important. Councillor Johnson.
So do you want to call it the city wellbeing strategy or just the city strategy?
City strategy.
Okay.
All right. If there's no further comments, I'll ask you to vote, please. And that has passed 14 votes for, none against. Thank you. Okay, that's our strategy put away for the moment. Thank you. And thanks to the officers for their work. All right, we come through to again back to item 16, and I invite officers up, David Murphy, Cameron Mackay and Chris Dyerberg again. And this is around our LTP prioritisation around operational expenditure. And there were some papers given to us from the CEO around our various units. There was a spreadsheet with a number of different programs, and I'll ask the councillors to come and speak to that, please. This was. Welcome, gentlemen.
Morena koutou. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Morning, councillors. So there was a set of slides that was circulated with the material. We're going to go through this very quickly. We know it's been pre-circulated and then it was updated again yesterday as we got that updated budget information. I think it's relatively clear why we're all here today. Like we did with the capital programs, it's about making interim decisions so we can pull together an LTP. Obviously builds on the work we've done on the capital budget. You've seen this slide before. This is the context in terms of pulling together the LTP. We did tweak that last bullet point on this slide. I think it previously talked about government reform, but I think ultimately what we're dealing with now is amended new direction from government. Cam's just now going to whip you through some of the financial information before we jump to questions.
Morena, just a few slides on financial information. I'll go through these relatively quickly. You recall from earlier presentations that we have a number of levers that we've been exploring in terms of how we're managing the overall budget and the increases that we've been facing. This slide just serves as a purpose around if you wanted to make a change to the operating program, be it up or down. $1.2 million equates to a 1% change in rates. So it's just a reminder. We continue, and as we have with the capital program, to seek more co-funding from partners in other areas. That serves as a key theme in our overall funding strategies. You do have the option to increase fees and charges if you wish to increase them more than the rate of CPI in areas, but that's just a reminder that lever is available as a counterbalance, I guess, to rates, which is the predominant funding of services. So a starting point, and we have been through a few iterations as officers around the operating program, and we have been updating that as well to reflect decisions that have been made and how the capital program impacts on that as we go through. So we have been doing that. We started, I guess, if we think of a journey, we started with some quite high impacts, and we acknowledged that we needed to do some work to mitigate that and bring that down to the number that was in your papers of, I think it's 15.6% was in your original papers. And then we've also flagged and identified any potential risks from doing that level of work. Obviously, that's been updated as of yesterday, where we found that we had in our rates calculation and operating program that we actually loan fund was also being fully rate funded in the year that it was being incurred. So that changed our year one starting position to 11.3%. In terms of the materials, the way in which we've tried to outline them is to provide an overview of what the activities are and what they provide and what the budgets fund in terms of those activities and activity summary sheets, and then we've put in some detailed financials and behind that an attachment 2. There is in attachment 3 items that elected members have referred to the long-term plan through various decisions over the past wee while, and it gives an indication of whether at this stage they're included or not included in the current version of the budget, and you'll have some decisions to make around whether you want to include or exclude some of those. This is an updated breakdown of the year one rates increase. As you can see, there is quite an impact from increasing interest rates that's facing everybody at the moment. So that's there and outlined. The decisions that you have made already around the renewal program in previous meetings has meant that has about a 1% impact on rates next year, remembering that it's funded on a 3-year rolling average. We and then we've identified a couple of, I guess, larger increases in terms of operating costs, particularly around things like utilities and insurance. Whilst in the big scheme of the overall council budget, they might not seem like big ticket items. They are moving at a much faster pace than inflation, particularly the insurance environment. And the more events like Cyclone Gabrielle and those sorts of things that we have as a country does have an impact on us in terms of the premiums that we are then inclined to pay in the next round. So that's an ongoing challenge that we continue to monitor and manage. And then we have all other, and that's where we have really tried a concerted effort to try and keep the overall total rates increase at a more acceptable level. This is what the 10-year picture looks like. Slightly different to what was in your papers. Obviously, when you bring down the year one increase, that means that the base for year two's calculation is lower, which means that you see a poke up of an increase in year two because of that. And I guess just to reiterate, so the decisions here today will help us in the drafting of the long-term plan that we'll bring back on the 7th of February, complete with capital and operating together. That gives a opportunity to see how the whole of the long-term plan is going to hang together, and decisions that you make today will help us in the drafting of that for your consideration. Happy to take questions.
Okay, you're finished. Thank you. Before I go to councillors, could I just ask, I mean, obviously we've spoken a lot about costs and expenditure, but about revenue, where can we see something around our especially our external revenue that's perhaps more at a macro or consolidated level? Is that page 213 of our document? Is that it? Because you were going to send us something that sort of identified it's got some really big numbers there, but there's no breakdown, so we don't know what's NZTA, we don't know where other government agency funding is, we don't know what fees and charges is, we don't know what where the Mercury royalties sit.
Yep. So apologies for that. We can provide that breakdown, and we've tried to start to provide that for the actual reporting for this year, so you can get a bit of a context.
Yeah. So the numbers probably won't change, will they? But they'll be within those bigger numbers.
Yes, they are. So for argument's sake, other revenue would be where the royalties for Meridian, Mercury sit. Fees and charges are all your charges for cost of service. And your grants and subsidies received is predominantly your NZTA funding and any other smaller grants that we might receive.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you. Just really just want to know where that all sits. Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Cameron and team. I've got a few questions. The first one is, what increase in fees and charges has been factored into the calculation?
In terms of fees and charges, predominantly at this point, the bulk of the increases in fees and charges have been at a CPI, just a CPI adjustment movement. We haven't yet factored in any substantial increases to any particular fee that I'm aware of at the moment, but there is the opportunity to be in some areas where we could look at that if you so chose us to look more than a CPI increase.
Okay, so at the moment, I know fees and charges is coming to us to consider in February, but I didn't want to make decisions now that would lock in particular increases then. So at the moment, you've just factored in CPI.
Yes.
I understand that it remains open, but we're not committing ourselves to more than that at this stage.
Not at this stage, but I guess if you did have areas that you would like us to explore more to bring back for you, that would be useful to know.
Okay, thank you. I've got some specific questions about specific operating budgets. Is that okay to ask those now? So, regarding the Palmerston North Surf Life Saving grant, that is not included. I'm wondering, and this is probably going to have to go to someone else, I understand, but I'm wondering if they have been granted sufficient money to see them through to the next round of the strategic priority grants, or is there going to be a gap if they're not included for 1 year or 2 years?
Anton Carter, Group Manager, Community Services. There will be a gap of 1 year in their current arrangement.
Okay. Thank you. And on the same, similar community area, so stay there, Anton. In the Community Committee, we passed a resolution to propose the 200,000 housing support budget plus the 30,000 tenancy support to go to the long-term plan. But I see that only the 200,000 is included, not the 30,000 for tenancy support. Can you give me an explanation for that?
I believe it's a finance issue, or maybe got lost in the translation.
Okay, so I'm going to say there's no good reason, but that's a bit unfair. But there's no operational reason or change of heart or anything. It was just a financial decision.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So if I was to propose to put it back in, there wouldn't be any objection from officers, I suppose, is what I'm checking.
No, not from officers.
Okay, thank you. Then my final question is, if there was an appetite amongst elected members to reduce levels of service in international relations, what advice would you give us on the best approach? I guess that's for David, probably.
I mean, I guess what I would say is that the function covers 2 areas. So the budget covers 2 areas, international relations and international education. There's very little room to move on the international education front. So most of the activities that have been delivered through the international education over and above the coordination provided by the officer in recent times have been funded through ENZ. The international education coordination function is something that the city has funded through one way or another for a number of years. That the function was previously at CEDA. So in short, in the international education area, there's really, the budget is effectively one person working with the sector. In terms of the international relations activity, there has been, I understand that there was some information provided to the Mayor which has been circulated with a bit more detail about the budget and how that's allocated. But again, once you take away overheads and the officer, there's, I think it's about $90,000 across travel, gifts, grants, catering, and some travel. So that would be the only area to move. Obviously, if there was substantial reductions, and it's a sensitive issue, we'd have to have a look at resourcing as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Thanks.
Just further to that, so around fees and charges, have we done any work on residential DCs, development contributions? Are they just sitting at the same level in your numbers?
We can't calculate the final DCs until the capital program is finished. I appreciate that has we've got a draft draft of the capital program now. We have officers working at present, as I said, running a whole lot of scenarios to the methodology behind the DCs. As I said, that's a work in progress. I can't provide an update as yet, but as I said, we are looking at ways of transitioning some of that DC cost across to residential from non-residential without breaking the methodology or creating evidence to do that. So, it's a work in progress, Mr. Mayor. We do anticipate we'll be able to provide a more detailed update at the February meeting. We are also investigating a number of related matters, such as charging interest on the debt that we borrow to fund infrastructure. So that would obviously, if we did that, that would push the fees up. We're also having, and have provided some answers on this in the chamber in the last couple of weeks, looking very closely at what the implications of the off-balance sheet funding mechanisms for growth means in terms of development contributions. So we've had some conversations just as of yesterday with Hamilton, who are not including DCs for IFF-funded projects or off-balance sheet projects associated with growth. So we have recently commissioned a legal opinion on that because we think it's going to be something that Audit New Zealand will look very closely at in terms of some of the assumptions we make about growth costs. So sorry, I'm going on a little bit, I appreciate that, but there's a lot of moving parts to the DC's policy and assessment and the calculations at the moment that we're still working through.
So do we need to give you any direction there, or are you working on this? Because I just take the view that we're considerably less than others, so, and it's a revenue.
Well, we've certainly taken that direction from previous conversations in the chamber, and as I said, are actively looking at means and ways of ensuring that our residential development levies reflect the true cost of growth and recognising that our fees are at a medium to low end for residential. So there's active work happening in that space. I can't give you the answer now about what it means.
And will it inform our final LTP?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. That's all. Yeah, good. Excellent. Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question on page 213, also relating to fees and charges. Given what the report says is that we're going to be increasing fees and charges in line with CPI and your previous answer, why does it state in year one we'd have a decrease in our total fees and charges but wouldn't get back to where we are this year until year 4?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Couple of reasons for that. So there are some areas where we have to consider the volume that might go through certain areas. So say, for argument's sake, building might be an area where the volumes might not be quite as high as what they were. So we've assessed that, but also the additional contractor cost for the spillover work has reduced to offset that. And we had a couple of areas where we had revenue assumptions. When we went to the zero-based budget, we actually had revenue assumptions for services that we were selling that we haven't sold for some time. So we've corrected those anomalies.
All right, thank you. This is a different question, but I think is relevant to the conversation we're having. A number of councillors aren't entirely aware with an IFF when that bill would kick in for the community. So I was wondering, does that bill that you would get for the IFF kick in once the infrastructure is operational and people are receiving the benefit from it? Or does that bill kick in when the debt begins? And therefore, effectively I'm asking, in the next 3 years, will people have an IFF water bill? Or will that be more like 6 or 7 years down the track?
No, so the moment in which the council has signed an agreement and then is drawing down on the debt, then the IFF levy will kick in. It may take until the finalisation of the build for the full amount of the levy for a person paying it to be paying that. So they'll pay the proportion based on the drawdown and timing of cash flows.
And so that's likely to be what, year 3?
Year 3, year 4, okay. Around that period.
And my final question was relating to the information we were provided with yesterday, and it's a bit of an unpleasant question, but given the information that was discovered led to a 4.3% reduction in rates, my calculation is that's about a $5.1 million mistake in our calculations. Is it just luck that it happens to be $5.1 million favourable rather than unfavourable, or are you confident that this is the only major mistake in the budgets that we could expect?
Yeah, good. Thanks for the question. In terms of the particular operating program that's been identified, as you'll be aware, and particularly it came up when we were talking about the funding for the artificial turf, where we said it can be loan funded, but there are it's an anomaly of funding, and so this is one of those anomalies in terms of how we fund this program. And the reason for it is previously, before we moved to what you'd call SaaS type software agreements and cloud-based software, council used to purchase a physical thing, and so it was an asset that you purchased and you amortised that or depreciated that over time, and so it came through the balance sheet. Because the way in which things have moved in that space, the accounting treatment of a SaaS has to be through operating accounts. But we've chosen to continue to fund that in the way in which it gives a benefit over a period of time. So I'm fairly confident in that particular issue that it's a one-off. What I would say is we will be making sure that we do a fairly thorough review of the whole set once all the decisions are made, because we need to do that. And that's when we'll bring that back to you on the 7th of February.
Thank you, Cam. That gives me some confidence. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a number of questions that I will try to rattle through. Some of them relate to the consultation document. I might leave those towards the end and see how we're going. First, some general questions. Thanks, gentlemen. Around the rating levels as they sit now, Cam, I understood from the slides that you presented this morning that the rolling in year one around renewals is at 1%. Do we have information across years 1 to 3 and how much that percentage has come down as a result of the recommendation that was made?
Yes, and I just have to find it because I had that with me last night. I think from memory, however, it was somewhere in the 1.5 to 2.5% mark, but I'll just clarify that for you. Just give me a moment.
Great, thank you.
Right, so sorry, just to clarify the question, this is the result of how much the rolling renewal came down as a result of moving from 3 to 5 year spread of renewals. So the difference is 2.6% over the 3-year period is what that reduced the rates increased by.
Great, thank you. Question around attribution of costs to activities, and this kind of stems from some of the written responses to questions. I'm trying to understand what guides that. How do officers end up making the call around where the costs sit against activities? Because it seemed like there's quite a bit of movement there.
Yeah, so this is in reference to how internal services are allocated out. Yeah, so first of all, we need to think about the methodology in which we allocate out, and typically there are a couple of drivers for that, and that's people and cost. So you have a couple of drivers that determine how you determine a fair share for an activity. Because up to now the operating budgets have been moving fairly fluidly to get us to this position. We do need to review, have we actually got, is that allocation that we've got there quite, is that fair? So we're going through the exercise at the moment. The other thing too is, you'll recall that previously we had 5 goals, which had, the 5th goal had some activities within that. Some of those now become an allocated activity. And so that also has meant that results in a change across the rest.
Great, thank you. So are there checks and balances in place that ensure that what we see isn't to kind of make something look cheap and something else expensive?
Yeah, it is certainly our intention not to show one activity more favourable than another in a sort of arbitrary way. We do use a logic. We do need to make sure that that's part of the reconciliation that we'll go through between now and the 7th of February as well, to make sure that we have got that allocation right. There may be 1 or 2 areas where one sub-activity within the activity group is wearing more than perhaps it should compared to other sub-activities in the same group. So we're doing that check as we speak.
Thank you. So I guess just what I'm trying to drill into is to understand, is that a policy-driven thing, or does it kind of come down to a consensus decision amongst senior levels of management about what's fair and reasonable?
It wouldn't be what I'd call a policy decision. It comes down to a methodology, a management methodology of how we determine to allocate internal services. We're not trying to propose wholesale changes to the previous methodology, but there were some areas that needed to be improved from the previous methodology. So we've incorporated some of those.
And it's a methodology that's documented and agreed?
Yes, yep, that's documented. Yep.
Thank you. A couple more here. Just the activity summary, there's a statement in 4.4 of the paper that said that the activity summaries are key chapters of the LTP. And I was just trying to understand what that meant in terms of the activity summaries that are presented in the paper, which seem, I guess, not necessarily drafted for public consumption yet. And I just wondered what the intent was in terms of reflecting those activity summaries forward into the actual LTP document that the community would see.
Hi, Andrew Boyle, Head of Community Planning. The intent of the saying that the activities were chapters was to describe that they form the key part of the LTP. The intent is not to put the activity summary sheets into the LTP, but to have the normal activity pages where we describe what the activity does, the levels of service and the cost.
Thanks, that's clarified that. 4.12 indicated one of the implications of adjustments was we'd have reduced public engagement with the council. And I just wanted to understand what the kind of frontline implications of that might be.
Scott Manser, Finance Manager. One of the changes through the various marks of the budget is to reduce the budget associated with the public engagement around council services and engagement.
Thanks, and I guess the question that I'm trying to get to is what the frontline impacts and implications that would look like to the community.
If I can probably paraphrase for one of the divisional managers, it would mean we wouldn't be able to pursue that work because there's no budget associated with it.
Okay. I guess, can we get some examples of kind of what's happening now that won't be happening in future then?
Could I perhaps ask one of the officers that's directly involved in that, if you could speak to that? I see you all sort of moving in your seats up there, so. Go to the far end, love.
Kia ora, Olivia Wicks, Communications Manager. Just, I guess at a high level, is that a lot of the teams have small budgets that we use for engagement. Those budgets in some areas, we had looked at potentially doing more in the future than what we had been doing, but as we started to see some of those, I guess, numbers coming through, we looked at how we could do the same or even better, but at reduced cost. So that's utilising some more of our free channels. It wouldn't have, I believe, and Jess has also looked from an advertising perspective, a detrimental impact on the community's access to information or their ability to be involved in decision making.
Great, thanks, Liv. Couple questions around specific line items. Just following on, there's a question in response to Councillor Johnson around the surf life saving being a 1-year gap. Is that in year one, and how many dollars are associated with that gap?
To answer your question, Councillor, the surf lifesaving, they are the only one in this position. They had 2-year secured funding. They would be eligible to apply to the strategic priority grants, which is the 1-year gap, but also bearing in mind that that is a contestable pool of funding, so there's no further guarantee of funding.
And if we had any indication from the Surf Lifesaving Club of how much they would need, or do we have a past track record of funding them to a certain level?
We have a past track record. I'm not sure of what their future needs would be, but I don't have that particular figure. It's been 15.
If that could be confirmed before we get to the end of questions, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Page 214 shows that the summer reading program line item ends after 3 years. Can I just have some clarity around intention there?
I'm sorry, I have to refer to Manager City Library.
Tēnā koutou, councillors, Mr Mayor, Linda Moore, Manager City Library. That line's been put in for a set period of time to allow us to explore external funding opportunities, which have ceased with us with ECCT Trust at the moment.
Great, thank you. So the intent would be longer term, that the program does sustain beyond 3 years?
Yes, well, hopefully we can secure external funding, so this
Great.
allows us to have a bridge for that.
Awesome, thank you. Page 218 indicates we need $20,000 to review Katja Birch. Can I just understand why we need $20,000 to achieve that?
Through the chair, kia ora koutou, Chris Smith, Strategic Facilities Manager. That figure was just a recommended baseline of what would be a review for the services for the last 3 years. That was the outcome of the council meeting that decided that we needed to do that service level review.
So that would be purchasing that service from an external provider?
It would be an external provider doing that, yes.
Great, thank you. Where else to go here? I will try to rattle through. Page 232 indicates that infiltration inflow is separated out as a line item, and I didn't really understand that because we've been doing I&I work for Yonks, and my expectation is we'd be doing it for Yonks, so I didn't really understand why it was still a standalone line item on page 232.
Just get Mike Moynihan to come down and talk to that.
Mike Monaghan, Group Manager for Three Waters. The inflow and infiltration as an operating programme is to basically give a targeted effort to make some headway in that space. There's certain parts of town where the network needs some real focus, and that was the idea of that programme.
So has the old 1401 program been sucked into MSL or whatever we're calling it now, and this is an increment above and beyond that?
Yes.
Ah, okay, great. That's clarifying. I think I'll leave it there, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Arbiter.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I've got two questions. One for you, Cam. On page 213, under other revenue, have you got any thoughts around partnerships going forward for budget expectations of what you're going to budget going forward for revenue expectations? So what are you thinking we're going to budget for, where we're going to get money from with our partners going forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. I probably don't have quite that level of detail to hand in my mind, but I think the council has taken an approach to try and access as much external funding as it can, and partner funding, and that can take shape in a variety of different ways. So, be that whether we're deliverer of a service or we're providing some support to someone else to deliver a service. So sometimes it'll show as revenue to us, sometimes it'll show as us providing a grant to a provider. In terms of a number of things that we have been discussing in capital program, that won't show in this other revenue line. That will show as non-operating capital funding or external funding, which we haven't got the capital aspects of the budget in here. And there are a number of decisions that council has made in the past couple of weeks, which will require some efforts for us to get that level of partner funding. And I guess if I was to also just note the ability, it is getting harder to get. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. My question's not around getting the funding. My question's around whether the system allows you to put a potential budget in of what you will budget over the next financial period, of what you want to get in. If that's really what my question is. Does the system allow you to do that over the next financial year?
You could, but what it really is required is it needs to be tagged to an activity. So if we are making assumptions around external funding that we're bringing in, it needs to be tagged to an activity, so that if we weren't to receive that funding, basically the caveat would be either council would have to decide to either pick up the difference in the cost of service or not deliver that service, and so we would have to identify what activities that would relate to.
Sure, thank you for that.
Sorry, I'll just get the CE to comment, because he was...
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor, we kind of do that already now. So a number of, when we went through the CapEx program and that as well, you identified some external funding that needed to come with that. Also, I think that if I recall, there's an additional recommendation that was received and passed as well, in order for us to go and have a look for other potential opportunities for revenue going forward. It is key for us to be mindful about the assumptions that we do make in the LTP process as well, and so Nature Calls is probably one of those ones where we're making some assumptions about external funding and being prepared for that. But I think in particular through the course of those first 3 years of the LTP, we'll be starting to have a look at a number of options to get return on assets and things.
Sure. My second question is to you, CE. Do you have confidence in the new finance system going forward with the mistakes that have been brought out recently?
Yes, through Mr. Mayor, yes, I do. And I think Cameron's explained this most recent error pretty clearly as well. There will be human errors and those sorts of things from time to time, but I'm very confident that the staff have got it well in hand and doing a good job in this space.
It wasn't really in staff, I'm talking about the finance system.
I said yes to that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, online, I'll go to councillor Naylor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. My questions, there's two areas. One is around the revenue assumptions. I understand that what's been included is just CPI increase for fees and charges. On page 153, there are some areas that have been outlined where there's some increased fees proposed. There's about 5 areas there. So am I understanding correctly that all the proposed areas for increase above CPI haven't been included in our revenue assumptions?
Yes, there hasn't been, we haven't made any of those adjustments in the budgets at this time, so it's just options.
Okay, thank you. And so how much additional revenue do you think we might be able to expect from these areas that have been outlined and also potentially from other areas?
We would have to look at it case by case, because obviously some things will have more of a movement than others, and it will just depend. There is also the variability of how much of an increase would you want to tolerate for some of these areas, so that will have a bearing as well on the end outcome.
Okay, thank you. And my other area of questions is around the assumptions of the size of the Capital New program, given that we have made some adjustments to that last Wednesday and on Monday. I think around $57 million of programs were removed. So what, in terms of the impact on not delivering those programs, does that have an impact on our OPEX? Or what were the assumptions originally on our OPEX of the size of capital program that we would be delivering?
So in terms of the way in which we pull the budget information together, so if different capital programs will have different impacts on the operating budget. So some programs that we deliver through CapEx, if it's for argument's sake a new facility, will then come with associated costs of maintaining and operating that facility. There are some where we might do a program that leads to a reduced maintenance outcome from an existing facility that we have. Those changes do get reflected through the budget as those decisions are made. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head precisely how much that has impacted in the consequential operational impact of all of those decisions at the moment.
Okay, so given the time frame for us receiving all these papers being put together and how it was only, a week or 2 days ago that some of those changes were made to the capital program, when could we expect to see some further reductions to operational costs as a result of those capital reductions?
I would expect that they would be relatively minor for the ones that occurred on when was it, Monday? I would say the operational impact of those would have been fairly minor, but and I'm getting a yes in my ear, so they're all actually reflected in the rates increases that were circulated yesterday, so they've been taken into account.
Okay, so the interest less interest cost or less debt repayment cost, that's already included in the papers, is that what you're saying?
It's included in the update provided yesterday by the CE.
Okay, thank you, that's all from me.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just two areas of questioning. First is about a couple of the OPEX programs, particularly, which I've now lost in my book. So, 1573, the Arts Events Fund is shown as reduced, and that was, we were informed of that earlier in the officer's proposal for bringing the budget down. But my question was, we've left 1464 Massey Arts in there, whereas this year we've repurposed it towards, within the scope, but towards some of Shakespeare. So I just wanted to get a comment about how those funds are sitting at the moment and whether that actually needs to be updated.
Kia ora, Stephanie Valvin, Community Development Manager. So both the Massey Arts funding and the Artists in Residence budget, which sat in MSL, have been bundled as they were this year and reallocated to the Summer Shakespeare grant going forward.
Lovely, thank you. That answers that one. And then my other area of question was about the consultation document. Are we doing that now or are we coming back?
No, we'll do that at the end.
Okay, that's me. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Isabella.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just had a quick one that's come off of Councillor Naylor's question. So I'm back on page 153 at 4.12. And that second bullet point has a list of increased revenue assumptions. And the third one down there is increased use of the waste minimisation levy. And I just wanted to confirm that access to that levy may well rely on us meeting our curbside collection targets in the future. Is that correct?
Bryce Hosking, Group Manager of Property and Resource Recovery. That is a signalled consequence from MFE that may occur. To be clear as well, though, they haven't actually said that that would or would not happen, but that is a signalled consequence that could occur.
Excellent. Thank you. And can you just remind me when those, the targets and things are going to come in force? I understand we had a bit of time before that was operational.
Yes, we do. For instance, 2030 is when they start to come in around things like food scraps and things, which is the first milestone.
Great, thank you. That's all from me. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Mayor, o tēnā koutou. On page 153, we've got under 4.12, we've got the third bullet point down, reduce proactive maintenance, e.g. buildings, parks and cemeteries, etc. Could I have a definition of what that proactive refers to?
So for a building, as an example, you might say, well, look, every few years we might paint, we might, renew the seals on your window. We might look at things like that. So the proactive maintenance plans are those bits of work that we do on an ongoing basis, just to fix things up, as opposed to a renewal where we would be, replacing something that has come to the end of its life. But it's that little bits of maintenance that we do just to sort of keep ahead of things failing.
So really, that's the cyclical maintenance, isn't it?
Correct, yeah.
Have we ever encountered issues where we have deferred maintenance, cyclical maintenance, and then found out down the track it's going to cost us a lot more than what it would have if we'd have continued with the cyclical maintenance?
Oh, yeah.
Right. Thank you. I suspected that. Kia ora.
Just a couple of finish up from me. So military heritage, we've got two programs there. We've got one around events, program 1157, that's obvious what that is. But the other one, is that the lectures? Is it Military Heritage 1554 for 8,000? Why are they separated? And is it the lecture series which that the Defence Heritage Group run?
You are correct, Mr. Mayor. They're separated because they're in different activities, and the 8,000 is for the military programs that the P&D HAG group pulled together across the year.
Right, okay, thank you, that's good. Slightly related, I think, but just a different unit. Citywide urban design, 762, delivering change. Again, is that those lectures that we do?
No, the Delivering Change program is where we sit alongside a investor, developer, landowner who's looking to do something different, something innovative on a strategic site. Most prominent example recently was we used that fund to assist the Safari Group with some co-design early on, working with funding some heritage experts to work with them to make sure that the consent process was smooth. So.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, on the other page, program under place activation, program 1273, Palmy Unleashed. I notice it's totally gone. Is that correct? And it's just been wrapped up into something else.
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Okay, that's fine. That's all from me. Finally, and I've got a couple more jumping in. Councillor Johnson. Okay. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I meant to ask this before. In attachment 3, or who knows what page that is, heritage funding shortfall not currently included in budgets. Can you just remind us what that shortfall was and what we thought that would do?
Yep. So we have a couple of things, and I'll speak to the ones that sit in the City Library activity because there are a couple of others. So there was a shortfall in the physical storage space of the archive that will sit in amongst the program that's in place for the Central Library and Te Manawa redevelopment. Digital storage space for Manawatu Heritage, part of that has been upfolded into program 2346, which is a digital transformation project. That's a critical element for us to maintain the security of all our digital taonga. The staffing related roles, we'll speak to some of those in the potentially if there's questions, but we do have the City Archivist role has been approved, so we're underway to look to recruit that in the new year. And that's probably about where they sit from our perspective, and it's mainly around the care of the taonga, whether they're digital and or materials, and the potential people, technical people, to be able to do the work that we require to get those in the best place.
So what you've described there for me, Linda, is that those things have been put into other budgets. So where it says in the papers not included in budgets presented to council, probably should more accurately say covered somewhere else.
Yeah, potentially. I think this is an evolving iterative process. So I think that we're doing the best we can to put those in invisible ways and bundle them together that make sense for workflows and delivery of programs. For instance, I'm not able to speak to the digital transformation project because it's got a lot of moving parts in it, but we have spoken to the team about the Manawatu Heritage piece going in there. So we are trying to make sure that's visible for councillors, but there's been no direct program put in per se, if that's your question. Yeah,
it's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, that's done the questions. I mean, if you think of something, something else, we can bring that back later. We'll now break for lunch, and when we come back, we'll just go through any additional recommendations to LTP referrals operational expense, and then we'll deal with the we'll do a substantive, and then we'll deal with the consultation document. So we're on a break, and we're back in the chamber in an hour, so we'll make that 1:20. Thank you. And